Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Allison and I'm an SRA advisor. So today we're going to be talking about email and phone etiquette, which might seem kind of obvious for a lot of students, but I know a lot of you who are watching are actually incoming college freshmen. And so I think this information will be very useful for all of you since I'm sure you guys are going to be finding yourself emailing a lot of professionals in the near future. And before I share my screen, if any of you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat and then I will address all of them at the end. All right? Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So email and phone etiquette. Okay, so first thing is that why does this all matter? Okay, so being professional in emails and on the phone is super important for various aspects of your life. For all of you, since you are all students, the number one reason for you right now would at least be school. So for school, it's really important to be professional in emails and through phone communication because you can ask for a letter of recommendation. And I'm sure some of you have asked for letters of rec before, like when you were applying for college. But letters of rec are super, super important if you're thinking of going to graduate school in the future and making sure that you maintain a professional relationship with your professors, your TAs, your like PI, which is like the head honcho of a lab. Those are all really important people that you can get a letter of rec from, but it's important that you communicate with them professionally. And then also if you're asking a professor a question about the exam, or doesn't even have to be about the exam. Sorry, let me zoom in here. Yeah. Or if you are like asking for an extension for an assignment, which is a very common thing to do when you're in college, you definitely, if you're asking very politely and professionally, they're obviously more likely to grant that extension and so on and so forth. And then for work, if you're emailing or applying for a job, obviously you want to be super professional because you want them to like you. Writing a follow-up thank you email after an interview, and then a potential employer might call you to ask you a question or offer you a job. So it's always important that you present yourself very professionally, right? Especially when it comes to jobs. And then just generally in life. So people are more willing to help when you are nice and professional. Okay, so is your email address professional? And so I think a lot of students, especially students who are all of your ages, do not have a professional email outside of their school email. And that's something that I recommend that you all do now, even though you have your school email, because your school email is actually not going to last forever. They're likely going to remove access to it once you graduate. So just something to keep in mind, but we'll go over what a professional email looks like. So never use words like boo, baby, cutie, party, or etc. in your email. Obviously, those are all very like inappropriate things to talk about or have in your email address. And then you want to ask yourself if you can look at your email and then know who is behind that email, right? So this example says dogfriend98@gmail.com. And that doesn't tell me anything about who this person is, right? So the best option is to always go for your first letter of your first name and your last name. So this is an example right here, jfuentes@studentsrisingabove.org. And of course, if you have a more common name, you can add in like, underscores or periods or numbers. It's totally fine. But you definitely want to have some part of your name in your email address. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the subject line, which is arguably, I think, one of the most important things when it comes to an email, because that's the very first thing that someone sees when they open their inbox. So if you don't have like a very captivating subject line or none at all, they're more likely to ignore your email, which is not good, obviously. So we have 4 examples here. And the first one is, or the first tip is to always include a subject. So your recipient knows what to expect. So obviously this first example right here is a horrible example of what you should be doing when you are communicating, especially with like your professors or, just any professional in general. So always have a subject line. You always want to proofread, so capitalized letters and spell check. Your subject also matters. And then thirdly, your subject must be relevant to what the body of the email is. So in this example, it's the bottom one. It just says, hey. That doesn't give me any indication of what the email is about. And then finally, the best example right now or on this page is reference request. And we're going to go through each of these emails so we can see, like, you know, what this example did right and then what the other example did wrong. Okay, so first of all, we're going to start with the greeting. So obviously you want to greet the person that you are emailing. And in this example, there's absolutely no greeting. It's just a straight up question asking, can you look at my personal statement? Which is, you know, not a very courteous thing to do, obviously. And then you want to double check to make sure you are spelling their name correctly. So this email was sent to Isabella. I know it says it's from her, but she just sent it to herself. It says, Isabel, I need a letter of rec for my Stand Fraud app. Can you write one for me? It's due next Monday. Thanks so much. Okay, so obviously there's a lot of things wrong with that, but I mean, first of all, if you're going to get anything right out of everything that you have wrong, you definitely want to make sure that it's at least the person's name. And then when in doubt, use dear or hi, just like as you would use in like a letter. So this is an example of a good or a well-written email. So it says, Dear Isabella, I am in the process of seeking a new position as a marketing associate, blah, 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 blah. So she started off really well with the Dear Isabella. Okay. And actually, before we go to the body of the email, I want to make sure that you're all paying attention. So I want everyone right now to just take a moment and type in the chat box an example of a professional email address. And it could be your email if you have one, especially if you have one for school, or just any other example. And I'm going to be looking at them. So. All right, yeah, perfect. So a lot of you guys are putting really good examples. So just to be clear, like your school email is perfectly fine for now, but like I said before, when you guys graduate, you're likely not going to have access to your school email right now, which is why I suggest if you all are, especially if you have a common name, like I would suggest just getting an email right now through Gmail so you can like secure that email address, and that way you just have it like by the time that you graduate. And you don't even have to use it. Like if you still wanted to use your school email, is totally fine. But just to have that like secured email address, I think is a good idea. So yeah, all of you guys gave really good examples. I think the most common is just like your first initial or your last name or your full name is totally fine. So yeah, good job everyone. Okay, let me share my screen again. Okay. All right, so now we're going to talk about the body of your email, okay? So we're going to start off with this example, and this one is obviously pretty, like, it's an exaggeration. I don't think anyone would ever write an email like this, especially with the effort it took to, like, make the text really big and highlight it in, like, teal and make it in Comic Sans and all of that. Just to give you guys an example of what a good body email should look like, one good rule that you should follow is that it should not be like a text message, and it should not include emojis. I think it depends. Emoji usage, I think it depends on like your relationship with that person. If it's someone that you don't know, or it's, you know, a professor or a TA or someone like that, like someone who's like very high up, I would definitely not use emojis. But you know, if it's like your coworker who you feel like very close to and it's not a really important email, then, you know, I think that you can kind of weigh your options there. But I would say in general, no emojis unless you feel super comfortable doing it. You want to spell out your words fully, so don't say how are you with the R and the U. Use a standard font size and background color. Don't use abbreviations such as FRI for Friday, and you definitely want to spell check. So obviously this example, like I said, it's very exaggerated, but it says, "Hey, Isabella, how are you? Can you reschedule the webinar for next Friday? Okay, thanks," with a bunch of emojis. Obviously an example of a very poorly written email because they, first of all, it's on a very professional font. It's really big. All the things that I mentioned before, webinar is misspelled for are you again, all the emojis. Yeah, a lot of things wrong with this. Okay, so next couple of tips is you want to capitalize letters and you want to be polite. So just say please and thank you. So this email right here, can you look at my personal statement? Very straightforward, but like I said in one of the previous slides, you definitely should have a greeting. You should definitely close the email too, which we'll go over a little bit later. And a few more tips. So keep exclamation points to a minimum. Again, you want to be polite and you want to give recipient ample time to respond, especially if you are asking them for something. So this is an example of another very poorly written email. It says, "Isabel," even though her name's Isabella, "I need a letter of rec for my Stand Fraud app. Can you write one for me? It's due next Monday. Thanks so much." So aside from how, they got her name wrong, it's not capitalized, the spelling errors, I think one important thing that I really urge you all to keep in mind of is if you're asking for something, especially like a letter of rec, or even if you're asking for an extension for an assignment, like you need to give whoever you're asking like ample time to respond. So I'm not sure when this email was sent, but I'm assuming it was sent like at the end of the previous week. And so if it's due the following Monday, that's obviously not enough time for them to, write the letter and do all of that. So always aim to like send an email a lot earlier than you think, especially if it's like there's a deadline that's coming up. Always try to give like a few weeks in advance. That way that person can, do a very good job at whatever you're asking them for. Okay, and then lastly is we have lots of email templates on the hub for you all to use. So this is an example of one. This is asking someone to be a reference for a job. And if you go on the hub, there's tons and tons of templates for all of you to use. And basically how they work is that it's just a bunch of text, and then the stuff that needs to be changed is in like red or bolded, and then you just have to replace that information with your own personal information, and then you have a beautifully written email. So definitely take advantage of all of those things on the hub. And yeah, next we're going to talk about the signature. So just as it is important for you to open your email with a greeting, you definitely also want to sign off with a signature too. So you want to sign your name, your first and last on your first email, and then first name and follow-up email. So if this is like, a cold email, which is when you're emailing someone for the first time, you definitely want to be more formal. But if you're constantly, following up with them afterwards, it's okay to use your first name. Include a phone number they can contact you at, very important. And then use a polite signature such as sincerely, best, warmly, and regards. So as you can see, this is a very well-crafted email. It has the greeting here, "Dear Isabella," the body of the email, and then she closes it with "best regards," her full name, and then her phone number. Okay, so final tips before we move on to phone etiquette. So you always want to respond within 24 hours, or to be more specific, 24 hours during the work week, so Monday through Friday. It's totally okay if they send something to you on like Friday night, you don't need to respond on Saturday because they're likely not going to check their email on the weekends anyways, and they're not expected to. Always better to be formal. So again, like if you don't know someone and you're sending them an email for the first time, always aim to be more formal. It's just better than being casual. Follow their tone. So this might kind of contradict what I just said, but if they seem to be a lot more casual in their conversation, then it's okay to kind of like follow up within that same type of tone. I will say though, like if you're communicating with a professor or like a TA or something, and you know that your grade depends on them, I would say just always aim to be formal anyways. And you'll find when you're in college, a lot of professors and TAs, they don't really respond very professionally. And that's just because they have tons and tons and tons of emails that they need to get through. So they might not always respond in the most professional manner, but it's always really important that you do that you respond professionally. Okay, keep it brief. No one wants to read a novel, 1 to 2 paragraph maximum. And if your paragraphs are really long too, I would suggest breaking it up. If you can like break it up into bullet points, if you're asking for like multiple things, you know, really like delineate those so it's not like hard to read in a block of text. Remember, what you email stays around forever, and I know the majority of you are going to be using your school emails, and just remember that that is controlled by your school and that they can see everything on the back end. So just be aware of, you know, what you're receiving in your inbox and what you're also sending. And then always proofread and use spell check, which is very obvious. Okay, so now we're going to talk about basic phone etiquette, and this is going to be pretty brief. But do not have a ring back tone. And if you don't know what a ring back tone is, basically you just don't want your phone to like be ringing forever and then it has like no sort of prompt afterwards. And if you can, try to like customize your voicemail instead of having the typical like, you have reached blah, 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 you know? I would suggest recording your own voicemail message. So this one just says, hello, you've reached the voicemail of your name. Please leave your name, telephone number, and a short message after the beep, and I'll be available to get back to you as soon as I'm available. And I think that's just nice because, you know, if you say your name, then they'll obviously know that that's like the correct number, and then it's also kind of confirming that you'll get back to them. Whereas with the regular like default message, it doesn't really have that. So definitely customize your voicemail if you haven't already. And then respond to voicemails within 24 hours. So speak loudly and clearly. If the caller asks, is this blank, say this is she or this is he or your name. And then address the caller by name too. Okay, so when you make a call, you want to ask for proof in writing if you are requesting something. Get a follow-up confirmation email. So one example is actually yesterday I just called to like change the reservation for something that I had coming up, and I never got a follow-up confirmation email. So that's something that I need to do. But definitely, you know, if you're asking for something to be changed or like you're requesting for something to be modified, always ask if you're going to be receiving a confirmation email. Confirm who you are talking to, excuse me. Say please and thank you, obviously, and then answer the phone in a quiet place, which is a big one too, because obviously if you're making a call in a super loud place like, I don't know, like a Starbucks or something, it's going to be really hard to hear them, and then it's just like a lot of back and forth of, oh, what did you say? Oh, sorry, could you say that again? And it's kind of awkward. So make sure that you're answering the phone in a quiet place. Okay, so that is the end of the webinar. But before you all leave, I definitely want to make sure that I'm addressing any questions. And while I do that, I'm going to launch the post poll. So feel free to do that. All right, so let's look at some of the questions. Okay, so one of them says, how do you know how to greet someone after the greeting? Dear Professor, dear Mr., or dear, to add on to the last question, how do you address someone such as a professor? So I would say whatever they sign off with on the initial email, I think that's the go-ahead for like, okay, you can call me this. So if a professor signs off with, you know, their first name, then I would, just to be on the safe side, I would probably still say Professor so-and-so. But if it's not a professor, like it's, I don't know, someone else, I would just go with whatever they sign off their initial response back with, because that's them letting you know that that's okay for them to be called that, if that makes sense. How do you address someone such as a professor? For me, I would always just say, dear Professor, last name. But again, it also depends on, you know, what they want to be called. And if they introduce themselves differently during class, then you could definitely go with that. Like for one of my classes, it was actually taught by a graduate student. And so she preferred to just be called by her first name. So whenever I emailed her, I just said, you know, hi, so-and-so. Or, you know, I think it really just depends on whatever they introduce themselves with during class, because that's obviously what they want to be addressed as. So yeah, I would go with that. And then if the response email to yours is less formal, then could you be less formal in emails following that one? I would say, I think it depends on who it is. I think if it, like, for example, for me, if it's like a coworker and I'm just, you know, it's not something that's super urgent or important, I'm just like, hey, can you tell me this? Or can you confirm this? Like, I don't necessarily feel the need to say, dear so-and-so, like, thank you, Allison. I'll just, you know, type like a 1 or 2 sentence email. But I'm sure you guys will find a lot, like in college, or at least this happened to me a lot, is when I was in school, a lot of professors would like email me back and just say, you know, I wrote a very, very nice email, dear professor this, and blah, 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 sincerely, Allison. And then they would respond back with like 1 sentence, or like even not even a full sentence. They would just respond, and then it would just say like, sent from my iPhone. And that happens a lot because, like I said, a lot of professors, they have tons and tons of emails that they need to sift through, and so they just need to answer them as fast as possible. But I would, for me, if I didn't know the person very well, I would just continue being more professional, because I think that's playing it safe. But of course, if it's someone that you know a little bit better, then I think it's okay to be less formal. So I think it just depends on the relationship with the person. So yeah, if there are no other questions, I think that's going to end it today. So thank you all for doing the poll. And again, there's tons and tons of email templates that you all can use on the hub. So I highly suggest taking advantage of those things, and it'll also give you a good idea of, you know, what a professional email looks like. So take a look at those if you want any examples. And yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you all for joining me today. And yeah, I'll see you all on the hub, or maybe in another webinar in the future. All right, bye everyone. Have a good afternoon/evening.